Well, happy to be here, Chris's presentation sort of is a meta presentation for mine, so it plows a lot of groundwork, which is great, so I can go a little bit quicker. But as I come up to talk about infrastructure questions, which is what I work in, what I'm interested in, and how I spend my time, and thinking about this group in the last couple of days, I sort of decided that I could get away with a starting slide, which is how I feel in this sort of education space to some extent. So I'll talk a little bit about why, and then I'll talk about how. So digital learning resources, widely available, but hard to apply for teaching and learning. I think we've heard this refrain enough times. We're hearing from enough different directions. It's currently too hard, right? We're not getting the adoption, potentially because we're not delivering it in the right format, we're not delivering it to the right people at the right time, in the right context, right? There's a lot of bits. It doesn't mean that the OER is not good, right? That the thing that we're creating isn't good. It's that we're potentially not giving the experience that goes around that in the way that we need to. And I'm working on a project with a number of people inside and outside of government, and it's a very open project, so we'll talk about that at the end. But trying to look at new ways in which we can create the tadpole model as opposed to the vertical model and really break down a lot of the walls that we have. So it takes too much work and time to find the resources. That's a very simple problem, but it's a very hard solution. Here's one that I strongly believe in, and I think that we are just missing a huge opportunity, and that's to me a lot of what Learning Registry is about. Educators and students already know how to use these resources. So when you get to the educators who have figured it out, right, it's done, right? It's done. Now, how do we know that, right? Today, the latest and greatest technology is maybe converting the clipboard to an iPad and the principal's in the room checking the boxes, right? That's the best interface we have in the classroom, as far as I can tell. That's not great. Users are leaving. Now as we move from a primarily print-based learning environment, the book and the stuff, to a primarily digital learning environment, users are leaving these data trails, what Tim O'Reilly calls data exhaust, right? But that usage data is often thrown away, right? We just don't, do you know where your log files are? You know, they're gone in many cases. Or they're locked up, meaning there are a few companies who are actually paying attention to their data exhaust and making some profit on it, but they see a distinct incentive to keep that stuff locked up. However, as I go from educator to educator and from OER group to even commercial entities, many of these organizations have absolutely no interest in keeping their data locked up, but they have absolutely no mechanism to share. And that's the simple premise of Learning Registry, is just I want to work with a number of you to create a place to put our stuff in public so that we can share it with each other, right? It's essentially what I might call social networking for metadata. So not Twitter, we're not competing with these big successful projects. We're saying we don't have anywhere to put our logs, our data files, our records, our assertions about quality, these sorts of things. What are the benefits? We can apply this usage data about resources to enable new learning services, whether they're accessibility services, front-end user interface services, search discovery, right? There'll be a lot of different people who play in this space who can make sense of massive amounts of data and slice through it in different ways for their own purposes. So that's a lot of DIY, which I'm a big proponent of. And as I mentioned, we can make a lot of better stuff as a result. And this just gives you a sort of visual of what might this look like, right? So we have the learning resource, and we've got the metadata, right? The LOM, the Dublin Core, right? And that's largely the producer's sort of domain. And what I'm making a case is that there's a tremendous amount of other forms of information about these resources that we can use to both to make the resources better and to deploy them in the right place at the right time, including pedagogy and outcomes, right? But that's a little bit further, that's a little bit more science fiction at the moment of how to accomplish that in public. But I think a lot of these problems can be solved. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. So my first sort of principle in government, as many of you know, avoid bureaucratic heat death. If you know the physics of heat death, bureaucracies are entropic entities that suck certain forms of heat out of living organisms. No offense. I'm just kidding. So this is the concept, the basic sort of functional concept that I'm thinking through with a number of you in this audience as well as others, and welcome more. But essentially there's a set of services, right? Resources, services, applications, community, right? Right now we're talking about OER resources and the services and the applications and the community as fairly distinct. And what I'm making a case is, as we think about metadata, not just as a structured, sort of polished piece of coal, if you will, that we work on for each little thing and release that to the wild and it stays distinct. If we think of it as an agglomeration, as a collection of concepts and ideas and information that can grow and build on each other, then we're talking about this middle thing here, which is metadata, and Susan Van Gundy here in NSDL's board, paradata, these various ways of expressing or asserting what is true about a thing in an opinionated manner. That can grow if we capture information from these various sources. Now, the dream, of course, is if we can close that loop, and we've heard a number of people talk about that, if we can close that loop and feed forward back into services and applications, we can get a thing that I've been calling knowledge amplification, which is we can amplify what we know in a virtuous cycle. And I think that that is possible. And I think we see it in other industries, and I don't think those models translate exactly in education, but I think we can learn a lot from them. So I'm just going to go through some use cases. A couple people said, you know, you talk a lot about learning registers, but I have no idea what it is. How does it work? So I'm just going to sort of flow through this, but I'll actually walk through it also. So the concept is NASA might have a cool video on fluid dynamics. So video, very tangible, very useful sort of artifact. But in the end, there's only so much they're going to say about it. Well, we think it's useful for teaching 12th graders and physics and blah, blah, blah. Right? They can make that assertion into if what you think of the learning registry as a timeline, right? Just like a Twitter timeline, a social timeline. But it's a metadata timeline, and it's distributed. We'll get into that. It doesn't sit in one place. There's no one plug to pull. NSDL might get that resource and say, hey, thanks, got it. So that's another event. But then they surface that resource to their teachers. And then NSDL might report back to the timeline later saying, hey, 33 physics teachers on our site actually use that and think it's great. Okay? Now, PBS might hear that from NSDL, not ever listening to NASA, because PBS and NASA, for whatever reason, maybe don't talk to each other. That's not true, but maybe they don't for this. They say, hey, what are you talking about, this great resource? And then they can look up, because the internet's great, and they can go find the original thing because they hear about it from teachers working with it on NSDL, right? So now we're amplifying what the teachers know. This isn't about NSDL and PBS coming to a corporate partnership to share and use resources. This is about driving information between the brokers of information, right? This isn't disintermediating these institutions. This is amplifying what they know and do, right? And then the physics teacher at PBS just got a NASA resource, even though PBS doesn't directly consume feeds from NASA, and I think that's a critical concept. This is a highly varnished example, but I hopefully gets you some of the crucial things. And then I'll talk in the next slide about this gigantic pile of information and the implications there. I think I just shined a laser at someone's eye, sorry. Okay, so now if we think of this common timeline and we think about the sort of next implication, this other use case, as we all start to agree, hey, we're willing to contribute resources with each other, we're willing to share what each other know, now we're looking at lots of people driving information into this thing, and what I call black math, which is the math I don't understand, right? Anything I don't understand, black math, which is basically a Netflix, Amazon, and other sort of wizards who take, I know something about you, and I know something about a lot of other people, and then I do something, that's black math, I don't know what it is that they do, but they do something, and then they tell me I want this blender. I don't know why they know that I want a blender, right? It's amazing. And it's harder here, like, let's be clear, that's a blender, right? This is teaching kids, right? It's not, math isn't gonna be the same, but I do think that what's important about that is it's not necessarily the math per se, it's amplifying the knowledge of who the individual is and who the other people are who have similar circumstances. And I do think that that correlation is in play in education. If it's not, the learning registry is fairly useless. So that's a bet, right? That's our research bet. That's why we're doing this as research. That's why this is a government project, because we don't know that that's a good idea, but we think it is. And we want you to help us figure that out, right? That's the place. That's the value proposition. That's where the OER producers, the OER distribution people, that's where you can help drive this and figure out if you can find the right black math. There's a lot of universities around here who are interested in this topic, right? And then what's interesting is then some users from another community actually use that black math and say that math is effective, right? So you can actually amplify even which algorithms and which approaches are effective. All right, so just what does the stack look like? Very briefly, there are federal resources, open resources, commercial resources, your resources that feed up not into a place. We are not disintermediating you from your content. This isn't a platform play where at the end of this they come to our site and not your site, ha ha ha, right? I'm tired of that game, right, to be perfectly honest. I'm not interested in supporting that model of re-intermediating and that market competition. You all are welcome into that space, but I don't think the government has any role in that and should not be building portals to compete with your portals. That's, I think, a wrong approach for at least the federal government. But what we can do is create infrastructure that maybe no one else has any incentive to create, but that others would use if it existed. And I think that that's a very appropriate and very internet-based view of what things we can do that maybe others can't or won't do. But then from the learning resource, learning registry network, which you can see there, there's lots of room for innovation and creativity and new technology on top of that. And that's who reaches the learners and the educators. Now, it's a very hard pitch for me to say, I have no user interface, I have no search box, I have no search engine, I don't have any users. Well, what are you doing, Midgley? Like, why are you working on this? So right, that's hard for me to sort of communicate, especially in a government environment. But to be fair, and you heard Jim Shelton yesterday, there are a lot of people who've opened up an umbrella over this project and said, look, it's going to rain and people are not going to know what the heck you're doing, and just keep doing it because it seems like you're doing something interesting. And that's really exciting to me and really encouraging. Hal Plotkin's right here nodding, and thank you, Hal. Yes, he's one of the umbrella holders for this project. And it's great. And I think that there's something useful we can get out the door here in a very short amount of time. All right, so government should build what others won't so others can build what they want. That's the motto of this project, right? Some attributes of this project, there's no off switch. So once you start it, you can't turn it off. Same as email, right? This is something that the people who want it, keep it alive. The people that don't want it, don't use it. It's fine, no problem, right? But as long as people want it, there's nobody who can come back in and come back later and say, we're turning that off because we don't like it. The people who find value in it are the ones who will participate in it. And I think that's an incredibly important. Accountability is local, control is local, right? So if I want to run a server, I will run it. If I want to share with these 5 people, I will share. And there's nobody else who's going to get in between you and your infrastructure and you and the other members of your community. Anyone can provide anything, any information about anything, right? You don't need to own it to classify it. I think this is a crucial principle in this concept. So we're not talking about NASA being able to talk about NASA resources. We're saying anyone can talk about anyone's resources. Anyone can say whatever they want. The only thing that goes along with that is identity, right? So we think identity matters with regard to this. So you might be able to say, I'm anonymous, and I'm saying that. And I say, well, I don't listen to anonymous statements about that. That's fine. So that's a choice I can make. But if I say, I'm Steve Midgley, and here's my identity, and I'm saying that, well, now the accountability is local again, right? So I can say something about that resource without having to be the owner of the resource. And I think the internet is premised on this concept, and I just think that we don't quite have a way in which to enable that communication in OER today that would surface into simplicity, simple interface, and so forth. Reaggregation is flexible, so we're not forcing you down a road of, if you don't use our format of metadata, you can't play, right? All forms of metadata ought to be, the burden should be on the consumer to figure out which metadata formats they want to consume, not on the producer to transform their format into some acceptable format. That's another principle of this. Utility is shared, right? If you like it, you'll pay for it. And trust is not centralized, so expertise is an opinion, and I think that that's a really important concept. All right, so just timelines of what are we doing and where are we doing it. So we released a specification and test cases at the end of February. We were joking about February 30, but we actually did get it on February 28. March 31, which is coming right up. Is it today? Is that the 31st? That's a cheap joke, sorry. Yeah, so today we actually are releasing it's been open for a while, so the code hasn't been closed up to now, but we have an OER event in Manchester, and there's a team out there right now playing with other hackers, sort of toying with our structure. So it's up there, it's on Amazon, the code is on GitHub, right? The community's out there. All right, so I'm going to wrap up, and I just wanted to show you the list of partners. So thanks for your time, and we'd look forward to connecting with you. I certainly would if this is of interest. Learningregistry.org is the sort of entry point to get involved in the community if you're there. Thank you.